Dakota Territory, the winter of 1880 to 1881. The air itself feels like glass. Each gust of wind slices through fabric and fur as if it had knives hidden inside it. Snow doesn't fall gently here. It scours, a billion sharp crystals grinding across the plains. The mercury plunges to 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, and the only thing thinner than the air is the line between life and death. Step outside tonight without fire, without fur, without food, and you will not make it to sunrise. And yet, Native Americans did exactly that, year after year, generation after generation. While settlers new to the land huddled in leaky cabins and sometimes froze where they slept, Native communities had already mastered this world. They didn't just endure the cold, they had systems, smart, efficient, and refined over centuries. Systems that worked with the land instead of against it. So how did they pull it off? Preparing for the cold. The secret to surviving winter started long before the first snowflake hit the ground. By late summer, Native families were already in full preparation mode. Forests and plains were combed for roots, tubers, nuts, and berries. Fish were smoked over steady fires, venison sliced into strips and dried until crisp. Nothing was eaten fresh if it could be stored. At the center of this system was pemmican, the ultimate survival food. Dried lean meat was pounded into powder, mixed with rendered fat and berries, and pressed into dense bars. A single pound could deliver more than 3,000 calories. It could last for months and sustain travelers across hundreds of miles. What modern hikers treat as a luxury energy bar was, for Native families, just another day's meal prep. Storage methods were equally ingenious. Roots and nuts went into underground caches lined with bark and grass to keep from freezing. Berries were packed in leather bags and hidden from animals. Snow and ice weren't obstacles but allies, serving as natural refrigerators. By the time the first frost glittered on the grass, everything was in place, food sealed away, firewood piled high, shelters repaired, clothing ready. Winter never caught them by surprise. They were always waiting for it. Shelters built for survival. Of course, all the pemmican in the world would not help you if you were living in a drafty shack. Shelter was the frontline defense, and native engineering was decades ahead of what most settlers slapped together. Take the plains teepee. At first glance, it seems simple: poles, hides, smoke flap. But winter revealed its genius. Families doubled buffalo hides for the covering, fur side in for insulation. The bottom edges were sealed with packed snow, creating a draft-proof base. Inside, an extra liner of hide or woven mats created an air gap that trapped heat. With a central fire carefully placed below the smoke hole, a well-built winter teepee could be 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the outside air. Adjustable smoke flaps let families manage ventilation without losing warmth, turning a cone of hides into a fine-tuned heating system. And here's the key: mobility. A teepee could be dismantled, loaded onto a travois, and re-erected within an hour. That meant families could follow game herds or move to sheltered valleys while still carrying a home designed to block wind and snow. Few shelters in human history combined portability and insulation so effectively. If the teepee was mobility perfected, the earth lodge was permanence embodied. The Mandan and Hidatsa along the Missouri River built vast domes sunk partly into the ground. A frame of timber beams was covered with willow branches, then piled high with grass, sod, and earth, sometimes several feet thick. Snow piling on top didn't collapse them. It strengthened them, pressing the layers tighter together and adding another blanket of insulation. Archaeologists who have reconstructed earth lodges report that even when the outside air dropped below 40 below zero, the inside stayed surprisingly stable. Dozens of people could live together in a single structure, their combined body heat and central hearths warming the air while the earth itself trapped it. Inside, winter storms became muffled whispers. Farther east, the Iroquois developed another model: the longhouse. Built from tall timber frames and sheathed in sheets of elm bark, these houses stretched over 100 feet and sheltered as many as 20 families. Fires burned in a line down the center, each with a vent above to release smoke. The arrangement wasn't accidental. The shared roof meant shared warmth, and the communal structure conserved resources. The Huron-Wendat in present-day Ontario and Quebec built nearly identical longhouses, showing how effective the design was in cold northern forests. Families lined the walls with mats, hides, and furs, blocking drafts. Outsiders often described these houses as smoky and crowded, but that was precisely the point. Concentrated heat, constant fires, and dozens of bodies working together against the cold. Travel to the rainy, wind-lashed northwest coast, and you'd find yet another solution. The Haida, Tlingit, and other coastal nations built monumental longhouses from massive cedar planks. Heavy timbers locked into place with joinery created box-like structures that could withstand both freezing gales and relentless wet. Fires burned inside, while carved posts and painted beams told stories of lineage and myth. These were more than houses. They were fortresses of wood that turned raw cedar into warmth and protection against some of the harshest coastal winters on the continent. The power of the fire. If shelter was the body of winter survival, fire was its heartbeat. Inside a teepee, the hearth sat at the center. Smoke escaped through adjustable flaps, which acted as a ventilation system and heat regulator. Add an inner liner, and the warmth circulated instead of vanishing upward. What looked like a simple campfire was really an efficient heating system. Fuel was no afterthought. Firewood had to be gathered, dried, and stockpiled throughout the year. In regions where trees were scarce, other fuels took over. On the plains, buffalo dung was collected, dried in the sun, and burned. To settlers, that sounded desperate. To native families, it was just practical energy storage. And it worked. Some tribes even stored animal fat to burn as lamps or add to kindling, a calorie-rich ignition source in a frozen world. And fire wasn't just about heat, it was about community. At night, families and neighbors gathered around the glow to share stories, sing, and pass down knowledge. In sweat lodges, fire heated stones that released cleansing steam. Flames symbolized continuity, a visible reminder that life pushed forward even when the world outside froze solid. To lose the fire wasn't just inconvenient. It was catastrophic. It meant darkness, silence, and the creeping cold of despair. Fire was both tool and teacher, heat source and spirit. It kept bodies alive and gave meaning to the long nights. Flames symbolized continuity, proof that life endured even in the harshest season. Layered in nature's armor, step outside in 30 below zero with the wrong outfit, and frostbite doesn't care how fashionable you look. Native Americans had no down jackets or heated gloves. What they had was centuries of trial and error with hides, furs, and clever tailoring. The results worked so well that modern survivalists still copy them. On the plains, nothing beat the buffalo robe. Huge, heavy, and warmer than most modern sleeping bags. It kept hunters alive in brutal cold. Fur, worn inward, trapped body heat. Fur, outward, shed snow and rain. One robe worked. Several layered together created insulation so effective that even 40 below became survivable. Hunters paired robes with deerskin leggings, shirts, and moccasins. Moccasins weren't flimsy. They were winter gear. People stuffed them with dried grass, moss, or rabbit fur. Some had double soles for icy ground. Others were waterproofed with buffalo tallow, making them better than stiff European boots that often left settlers frostbitten. In northern forests, Ojibwe, Cree, and Inuit developed full layering systems. Caribou hide parkas, beaver fur mittens, and raccoon tail caps trapped warm air while leaving room to move. Winter clothes had to keep you working, chopping wood, hauling water, hunting. Even babies were protected. Infants in fur-lined cradle boards with moss padding stayed snug, dry, and insulated. The moss wicked away moisture and doubled as an early diaper. Boards could be placed near fires or warmed stones, ensuring survival through long, freezing nights. Clothing also carried meaning. Robes and parkas were decorated with quills, beads, and painted patterns. A buffalo robe might show dreams or victories, turning warmth into cultural record. What settlers dismissed as primitive dress often outperformed their wool and leather. Sleeping smart, the human furnace. Surviving the day was one thing. Surviving the night, when temperatures plunged even lower and the body slowed into rest, was another challenge entirely. Sleep wrong, and you might not wake up at all. Native strategies for sleeping in winter were as ingenious as their clothing and shelters, turning bedtime into a finely tuned survival system. The first rule was simple: sleep together. Sleep smart. Families huddled close, wrapping themselves in buffalo robes and fur blankets. Children and elders, the most vulnerable, were placed in the middle, cocooned in safety. Adults formed the outer layer, serving as living insulation against the cold. It was a human heating grid, fueled by body heat, coordinated not by chance, but by cultural memory. Bedding wasn't just hides tossed on the ground. Many tribes prepared the floor carefully. Layers of pine boughs, reeds, or woven mats provided insulation from the frozen earth. Extra hides went underneath the sleepers to block moisture and trap warmth. Some communities even built raised wooden platforms, lifting themselves above the cold air that naturally pooled near the ground. It was the same principle modern campers use with insulated sleeping pads, applied centuries earlier with natural materials. Then came the innovation of fire-warmed stones. Rocks were heated in the hearth until glowing, then wrapped in hide or bark and tucked beneath bedding. Slowly, over hours, they radiated warmth through the night. Combined with furs, raised beds, and the group sleeping strategy, it kept people comfortable, even when outside temperatures fell below zero. Dogs also had their role. In some communities, they slept inside lodges, curled near the entrance or at the edges of sleeping areas. They were guardians, alarms, and in their own way, extra heaters. Winter hunts, chasing the bison in the snow. Hunting bison in summer was already demanding. Hunting them in winter? That was survival on expert mode. Picture a herd scattered across a snow-covered plain, the wind slicing like knives, snowdrifts swallowing horses to the knees. And yet, plains tribes still went after them, because the payoff was immense. A single buffalo could mean the difference between hunger and plenty, cold and comfort. Winter hunts weren't routine. They were strategic missions, attempted when supplies thinned or when herds moved close enough to reach, without exhausting the camp. Hunters tracked bison into valleys where snow was thinner and grass still poked through, or they used drifts to their advantage, driving animals into deep snow where their massive weight slowed them down. Cliffs, ravines, and natural bottlenecks often became chosen grounds for the kill. The cold was both a danger and a blessing. Hunters risked frostbite, exhaustion, and the collapse of horses weakened by thin forage. But once a buffalo was down, the freezing air turned every kill into a built-in refrigerator. Meat stayed fresh for weeks, sometimes months. Fat hardened into blocks that could be stored or rendered into tallow. Bones were cracked for marrow and simmered into broths that warmed from the inside out. Nothing went to waste. The rewards of a successful hunt rippled across the community. Fresh meat boiled in stews that night. New hides became bedding, robes, or covers for shelters. Sinews turned into thread for sewing. Horns and bones were reshaped into tools. The sheer efficiency of it was staggering. A 2,000-pound animal transformed into food, warmth, clothing, and hope. But winter hunts were also symbolic. They weren't just about calories. They were about resilience. Proof that even in a season designed to break the human body, skill, cooperation, and courage could still overcome nature's harshest tests. Hunters returned not only with meat, but with pride, showing their families that they could provide even when the land itself seemed determined to starve them. It's worth remembering that most food had already been prepared in the fall. Meat was dried into jerky or pounded with fat, and berries into pemmican that could last months. But when those stores ran low, a winter hunt could make the difference between survival and despair. Success wasn't measured in trophies, but in steaming marrow soup, in bellies full on a bitter night, in the knowledge that life would continue through the storm. Snow, ice, and clever tricks. Blizzards carried their own danger. Whiteouts could erase the world in seconds, leaving even seasoned hunters disoriented a few steps from home. To counter this, families strung guide ropes between lodge doors, food caches, and corrals. Holding the rope was the difference between safety and death. Miss it in a whiteout, and you might freeze 20 feet from your own doorway. Snow also became part of the food system. Tribes carved holes into frozen lakes and rivers, lowering nets or setting bonefish traps. Some communities froze entire fish inside blocks of ice, slicing off portions as needed through the winter. Others relied on under-ice weirs, ingenious traps that caught fish passively while people stayed sheltered. The cold itself became a tool for preservation. For travel, snow demanded innovation. Step into a drift without equipment, and you'd sink to your waist, burning more energy in minutes than food could replace in a day. The answer was the snowshoe. Crafted from bent wood frames, strung with rawhide webbing, they spread a person's weight across the snow. Each region fine-tuned the design, long and narrow in forest country for maneuverability between trees, wide and rounded on the open plains for flotation on deep powder. Centuries later, modern snowshoes still look almost identical. And then came the sleds and toboggans. Pulled by dogs in some regions, by people in others, they hauled firewood, meat, and supplies across frozen ground. Hunters greased the runners with animal fat to prevent sticking, a trick that turned a rough sled into a smooth glide. Before horses became common, dogs were essential, pulling loads far beyond what a person could carry, and doing so even through the heaviest snow. Adaptation mindset, learning from the land. For Native communities, winter wasn't just a season to be endured. It was a teacher, and every storm carried lessons. Survival wasn't about brute force. It was about observation, respect, and adaptation. Those who listened to the land outlasted the cold. The adaptation mindset began with watching the world carefully. The shriveling of berries signaled the final call to switch to winter gear. The early flight of geese warned of harsher cold ahead. The sharp bite of the first frost told families it was time to move into winter camps. None of these signs came from guesswork. They were learned through generations of experience, passed on through story and ritual. Animals were the best instructors. Bison pawed through snow to uncover grass, teaching hunters which valleys held better forage. Foxes curled into hollows, showing where wind was weakest. Bears disappeared into dens, reminding people that insulation and rest could be as powerful as action. By observing wildlife, Native peoples mirrored the most efficient strategies of survival, adopting what worked and discarding what didn't. Knowledge wasn't left to memory alone. On the plains, many tribes created winter counts, pictographic calendars painted on buffalo hides that recorded the most significant event of each year. A brutal storm, a great hunt, a devastating famine, all became images preserved for the future. These weren't just records, they were survival manuals, visual reminders of what nature had thrown at them and how their people endured. Elders explained them to the young, ensuring the lessons lived on. Adaptation also meant mobility. Instead of resisting the land, tribes moved with it. Families shifted to valleys, riversides, or sheltered groves where resources were more reliable. These migrations weren't signs of weakness. They were acts of wisdom. To fight the environment was to lose. To bend with it was to survive. At its core, adaptation was spiritual as much as practical. Winter was not simply an enemy. It was a season of reflection, testing, and renewal. Ceremonies honored ancestors who had survived storms before. Storytelling kept minds sharp and morale strong. Even hardship carried meaning, shaping resilience as much as endurance. For Native Americans, winter was not chaos. It was a cycle, part of the balance of the world. To survive it, you didn't fight against it. You learned from it, guided by the animals, the sky, the stories, and the wisdom of those who came before.